Welcome, everybody. We are excited to be kicking off the breakout sessions this afternoon. Welcome to Finding the Key in Key Information with Dr. John Bauman, who's the Associate Vice President for Research Compliance at Indiana University, and Ryan McDowell, who is the Director of Office of Research Integrity at Children's Mercy Research Institute. We're excited to have both of them here talking about this new provision from the new Common Rule. And we will go ahead and go live with John. John, take it over.
Thank you, Joshua. Well, welcome everybody. I wish that we were seeing you in person, but we will cope with that and do as best we can to make this an inviting and informative workshop. Please don't hesitate to write questions in the Q&A. If there are questions of clarification, we would try to get to them right away. If there are questions that are not so much clarification, but are more discussion oriented, we might just in the pursuit of staying on schedule, keep them till towards the end. So we welcome you. Here's the table of contents. Basically, we're really in 4 parts. And we were sort of talk some high level stuff, and then Ryan will talk about what they did at Children's Mercy, and I will talk about what we did at IU for each of these levels of things. So again, I don't know how long we're going to call it the new Common Rule because it's already a couple of years old, but maybe it's sort of like, a new employee, you got a honeymoon for a period of time, and this time would call it for a little bit longer. But as everyone probably knows, a key element of the new Common Rule was the requirement for key information to be added, a summary of the important stuff, a concise and focused presentation of the key information. And it really was designed to be a solution to the problem of consents being way too long, way too complicated. And it was designed in order to help ensure that certain things don't happen. One is that there's a lot of information that, potential subjects found a 33-page consent form to be very complicated, to be very long, to be confusing, and in fact, to be frustrating. And so one of the purposes of the concise summary was to avoid this. Basically, to cross the street, push the button, wait for the walk signal, wait some more, lose faith in the bullshit button and cross anyway. And so the idea was that the concise summary should be a guide to help the potential subject work her or his way through the longer consent in order not to get lost, in order to not to lose faith, and either too quickly agree to participate or too quickly agree not to participate. And the other reason for the key information summary is to really make sure that the message that you want to get across in the informed consent is actually provided, is to make sure that the potential subject understands the information that you are attempting to provide him or her. In other words, to avoid a situation in which he always gives me such a nice wave, right? The person on the island is waving to get the heck out of the island to be noticed, but the people on the plane see it differently. And so another reason that we have the key information summary is to make sure that the most important points are not only communicated, but they're also understood. And so we have this new regulation, this new addition to a consent form. And some of the challenges are that an institution has to decide what to do with this, is to decide, A, when to require it. Do you require it on federally regulated or all research consents? Obviously, as we all know, the Common Rule technically only applies to federally funded or federally regulated. And then the other question is, for what length of a consent form will you add a summary? If you have a 1-page informed consent, do you have to add it? If you have a 2-page, if you have a 3-page, if you have an information sheet because you've waived documentation of signature, do you still need the summary? All these are the types of questions that an institution has to ask itself in terms of when they're going to require the key summary. And then that is comparatively easy compared to the next question of what gets included in the key summary. What is in fact key and what is not key? And how do you make sure that your staff, your researchers, and your IRB members have the same understanding of what is key? And so what we're going to be spending now is talking a little bit about how Children's Mercy and about how Indiana University attempted to manage the process of making those decisions. We will give you the outcome of those decisions, but the emphasis is much more on the process at this point and what we all did to come to a institutional understanding of when, where, and how to include a key information summary. And on that note, Ryan, it's yours.
All right, thank you, John. So I wanted to talk about what we did at Children's Mercy. And I'm going to start kind of big picture a little bit. Back a few more slides. There we go. I want to start big picture a little bit and talk about an overall initiative that we did, and then focus in down to the conversation about key information. So when we saw, the leading up to the revisions to the Common Rule and the key information and what was going to be included, at that same time, we were already in the process of kind of putting together a straw man of an overall improvement initiative for our consent process. We had already identified that they were stale. They had been the same way for decades before a lot of us at the institution had gotten there. And we really felt that we needed to do an overhaul, really a transformation of how we did the consent process. So we had already put together kind of a straw man of an improvement initiative. And then when the revised Common Rule was finalized, we really added that level for the key information. So our initiative, we had just called it the Consent Excellence Initiative, and the goal was to really engage a variety of stakeholders across the institution and the community about current consent processes and identify what are our areas for improvement. And then along the way, take that opportunity to really define key information and how we were going to comply. Next slide. And I really have to give credit where credit's due. If you have not gone out and read the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiatives Informed Consent Project, I highly recommend it. Go to the CTTI website and look at it. In reading their project and the results of their project is really what sparked our interest in taking on an overall improvement effort. And we really did base a lot of our work off of the work that they already did. The lit review that they did on consent and comprehension, the focus groups with patients and providers and researchers was really informative. It's a really good starting point if you're looking to take on a larger initiative. So I just wanted to give credit where credit's due there. Next slide. So going into our overall project, we knew that there were certain things that we had to do better. So we had already identified some themes of improvement. Number one was address barriers to comprehension. And I think that's when we're talking about key information, going back to the Belmont report and the principles within respect for autonomy and the consent process, the information, comprehension, voluntariness. We felt like we always did a good job with getting all of the information in there. But where we weren't doing a great job was comprehension. We weren't giving it its due diligence and doing enough to ensure comprehension. So we knew going into it that we really needed to address barriers to comprehension and get people thinking about it in a different way. So that was at the top of our list. Secondly, again, we had confidence that our forms were compliant. We include everything we need to in the forms, but there was just way too much of an over-reliance and focus on the consent form itself, the document, as opposed to the living process around the document. So we really wanted to develop education and resources and things to really encourage people to focus more on the conversation and less on the form. We need to get the form right, but we really need to get the conversation right is what was really crucial, is what we were finding. Thirdly, we wanted to make it easy to be excellent. My vice president at Children's Mercy, she always talks about a circle of compliance and how she really wants everybody wants to be within the circle of compliance. And if you find yourself outside of there, a lot of the times it's due to a broken process or a misunderstanding. People don't want to be outside of this, of compliance. So we really wanted, whatever we did develop, whatever we found out, whatever feedback we got, we wanted to make sure and develop job aids and resources and education to make it easy for our study teams to be excellent at the consent process. And then last for us, being a pediatric institution, we really wanted to put some emphasis on the assent process as well. We always get worried that assent can be an afterthought when it comes to parental permission, and it doesn't have the same regulatory burden as consent or parental permission. It's a bit of a lower bar, and do people really understand what it's about and the variety of, you're talking to 4, 5, 6-year-old versus a 14, 15, 16-year-old. So we really wanted to focus on that and make sure that everybody in our institution, we always talk about, and when you're working at a pediatric institution, you have to be great at assent. That is something that's typically unique and an emphasis at our institution. Next slide. So the groups that we reached out to, there was a lot of different groups. Our patient and family engagement program, our teen advisory board, our health literacy committee, inclusion and diversity and research work group that I was co-chairing at the time, our Assent champions. These are child life experts that work in the hospital that are basically advocates for the inclusion of kids in healthcare decisions. So really getting feedback from them. And then also our research community, our study coordinators, investigators. We did a lot of focus groups on getting feedback on their interactions with the IRB and what it's like to draft a consent form and some of their challenges. But I really want to highlight today the three with the box around them there: the patient and family engagement program, the teen advisory board, and our health literacy committee. Next slide. So when I went to our patient family engagement program and asked them, hey, I want to get some feedback from patients and families on that have participated in research and really try to engage in, because we, at the time in 2018-19, we didn't have a research focused advisory group similar to this. So I was really going through the hospital channels to try to talk with parents and families. And they directed me to the Rare Disease Patient Family Advisory Council, because a majority of the parents on that council had kiddos who had participated in research for rare diseases at some point in time. So they were the most research savvy group. So that was where I was sent. And in talking with them, I was asking them about key information. I was explaining to them the new requirement and why it was being implemented, and wanted to get their feedback on how they felt about it and what should be included as that key information to help them choose what, might or might not want to participate in the study. A lot of the feedback was exactly what you'd expect. The risks, benefits, a little bit about the science. They weren't interested in knowing the full rationale, but they did want to know a little bit about the background and the science. But from the rare disease patient family group, and quite frankly, every parent that I've talked to over the years, the thing that always stands out to me is their interest in practical issues on how participation in the study is not only going to affect my kiddo who might have a condition or might be participating, but all of my kids, the rest of my family. We are a unit, and participation in a study could possibly affect our entire family. And that's what they're really wrapping their heads around when they're considering whether or not to participate in a study. So they really want to know what's going to happen. What are the visits? What's the expectations of us? What are you expecting from us? How many visits are there? Am I going to have to pull my kiddo out of school? Am I going to have to pull my other kids out of school in order to make it to visits on time, and these sort of things? These very, very practical, life-affecting things. It was what they really wanted to know and really wanted to be upfront, were major factors in their decision whether or not to participate. They also called out extra cost, again, a very practical concern. Was there going to be any additional cost to participating in the study? And also if reimbursement was available. They were very quick to say compensation was not that important, but extra costs, or if reimbursement for travel or something, again, rare disease, there was instances there where some of these families had to travel quite a bit to go to centers that were doing studies for these rare diseases. So reimbursement was important to them too. Next slide. After that, the next place that I went to was our teen advisory board. And our board is called Kids and Families Impacting Disease Through Science. So Kids KC, it's our local chapter of the International Children's Advisory Network. So we went to them and I said, these are a lot of kids who had either been patients when they were a little bit younger or current patients. And some of them are just teens who are interested in maybe in the healthcare profession of some kind and join the advisory group. So we went there and asked them the same thing, talked about this new requirement for key information and what was the most important things to them, either when they participated or if they could envision participating in a study. And the feedback we got, I will say, I always have to say, when you talk to the teen advisory, they are brutally honest. They do not hold anything back. They were very clear about what was important and what they did not care about. It was an interesting experience. It's similar to the parents. They did say that, the common and severe risks, but the kids really wanted to point out that the benefits were just as important. And we got really interesting questions. They said, why do the risks always come before the benefits in a consent form? The interesting questions like that. There was like, I don't really know. We're a risk adverse society, I guess. So we cover the risks first before we talk about the benefits. But they had really good questions and things like they wanted to know the mode of administration of the drug. So was it, because we were typically talking about with them about clinical trials and so they want to know like the mode of administration. Is it a pill? Is it IV suspension or something? They wanted to know that kind of information. The FDA approval status was really important to them. It almost seemed kind of like a badge of honor at times. Are they participating in a study that had an investigational drug versus an approved drug? They were really interested in that FDA approval status. When it came to privacy, they were very quick to point out that privacy is not important to them, but it's important to their parents. That I think they're used to participating in a world where the social media and privacy, it's a different thing to them than it is to us old folks. And they were quick to point that out, that their parents probably want to know these privacy things, but it's not important to them. The one thing that they emphasized over and over was blood draws, blood draws, blood draws. Especially those who had participated in PK studies in the past and things like that. It's I can't understate it. It is that they are definitely affected by blood draws. They want to know how many there are. They want to know when they're going to have them. It is a very important thing to them. It's something that I think they have to prepare themselves for, and they want to have a grasp on before they commit to participating in the study. Next slide. Kicking it over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. Just again, for a little bit of context, Ryan comes from a pediatric hospital, so clearly a major focus, as he indicated, on ASCENT, on kids, on parents, and things along those lines. Indiana University, the HRPP, oversees human subjects research for all 7 of the Indiana University campuses, as well as several different healthcare systems throughout the state. So again, just a little bit of a context, because we have some slightly different issues that we have to deal with. So we approached it like we approach many things, like many HRPPs do. The first thing you do is you create a working group. And so we created an informed consent working group. And besides brainstorming among itself, they also engaged in a couple of very specific activities that we want to focus in on. So one of the first things that they did was conduct focus groups regarding concise summaries. We did it with researchers. Most importantly, I suspect that we also, through our CTSI, we did it with subjects and non-subject community members to try to discern what type of information they would like in order to populate the key information summary, what they would find the most useful, what they would find the most understandable, and what would help them to make a decision. As one can imagine, especially given a variety of research, it was kind of all over the place. And so we really decided at the end of the day that it was less productive to come up with a template, but rather we decided to develop a guidance. And the guidance had provided the regulatory basis for the key information summary requirement, discussion of when you had to include that summary, and perhaps most importantly, at the end of the day, the types of information that needed to be included. And it is a statement that the project is research and participation is voluntary, a summary of the purpose, duration, procedures, risks, discomforts, etc. and then other key information as we deemed appropriate, again, on a study by study basis, such as summary of costs, payment information, alternatives to participation, et cetera, et cetera. So we moved away from a template and instead developed a guidance. But we also did something else. We also launched a pilot. And here I have to give a little bit of an apology. The pilot was really geared, as you can see in here, on developing ways of providing information about key information, ways of providing the key information without using text, without using just words, because we were so concerned about that it would just increase the density of an already dense informed consent document. And here I'm, again, my mea culpa, if you will, is many times as a parent, I thought, and occasionally I told my kids, do as I say, not as I do. I have to sort of apologize here. While I'm going to talk about the development of a visualization approach, I ain't visualizing, I'm just giving you text. So I did not do what basically the purpose of the pilot was for this presentation. But we said, let's launch a pilot and to encourage creative, custom approaches, making use of visual elements rather than just words. We create basically a tool for creating creative, concise presentations when it is needed. And so what we did is we several staff volunteered to sort of lead the effort on developing visualized consent documents, visualized key information summaries in order to help foster the accessibility of the information that we want to get across. And I'm going to just sort of show you, the point here is that we did this exercise to come up with different approaches. No single approach ruled the day, if you will, but these are the different types of things we did. So we launched the pilot. We identified previously approved greater than minimal risk studies, which would require a concise summary. We worked with the study team to identify what sort of key information they thought might be involved. And we often did observe a real or a mock consenting process in order to really foster a greater understanding of what we thought might end up being key. Then created a draft. Each of the teams created a draft using the visual elements, especially icons, to demonstrate the information that was supposed to be in there. And then we reviewed that with the research team and focus groups of potential subjects. And then we combined the creative, concise summary with the existing consents and presented to the board for approval. So in other words, we launched a pilot in real time for real studies that involved real subjects, not just a mock process. The original template of consent really looks like this, looked like this for IU. And then here's what we sort of came up with. We had, if you will, a biobank study in which, if you could see the pictures, it talks about what will be collected, what information will be accessed, how is it going to be kept safe and secure, basically focusing on procedures, risk, and use. Another one was for an NIH-funded molecular phenotyping study. And here is why are you a subject, the purpose, the procedures, the risks. And again, it's trying to present them in a way that is both visually satisfying, but also visually illustrative as to what's going to happen, what the subject is going to experience, and what's going to happen with whatever they provide to the researchers. Here's another one for a multi-site NIH-funded study. Again, blood draws, scans, what are the research procedures and what are the risks? For a psychiatric study, we use this image, we use this visual as a way of doing it. Some of these were, and of course, the better ones are done using an e-consent, using an iPad or something, so you can really have a rich presentation rather than just pictures on a paper. But indeed, this approach works for either of those approaches. A cancer study, this was a donation study, a study to get donations at a cancer it's not a cancer even, it's a cancer event, forgot the T. And again, talks about the type of things. You have access to these on the slides that are available. And so we don't need to go over line by line unless you have any specific questions that you want to discuss. And here's for a VA study. And here it's sort of a horizontal across the top, and then 3 verticals, one with procedures, one with risks, and one with details about how long, what, where, etc. So that's the exercise that we went through at IU. Now we're going to talk in the same way we talked about the exercise that happened at Children's Mercy. Now Ryan will begin talking about what was the outcome of those processes.
Yep. So next, very similar to like John was saying, we knew that we wanted to attack our templates and resources and things like that. And this you can see here on the left is our old, stale, horrible consent template that we've used forever. It predates a lot of us that have before a lot of us have even been working at Children's Mercy. And it had just, it's overgrown. It's great, again, great on the information. It includes everything you could want it to include, but does no services for anybody when it comes to comprehension. It does not facilitate comprehension in and of itself. So again, we knew going into it that was something that needed to be addressed and improved upon. On the right is our new general template, this one specifically for a clinical trial. And you can see how it's visually different. And again, going back to key information, here we have all of that key information right there on the first page. And we have the call out there that, hey, this is feedback from our parents and subjects that suggests what they want to know. So again, completing that, we got the feedback and we're communicating it to our investigators as to what is the information that we've found out that parents and families and patients really want to know about. And I will say this is where we're going to start getting into that third group that I referenced earlier with our health literacy committee. If there was one takeaway from this project, and we're still going, the project was supposed to take a year. We're going into year 3. You throw in a pandemic, you do all this other stuff, and things take longer than you hope. But we're still landing the plane with some of these materials. But if there is one takeaway from the entire project, it was the new connection that we've made with our health literacy committee at Children's Mercy. And here you can see with this template, this is really following a lot of those health literacy committee or those health literacy principles. The chunking, the white space, just making it more easily comprehensible, easily digestible. Next slide. So where we had landed with after talking with everybody, again, goes back to the CTTI project. One of the things that they recommended from their informed consent project was to use a tiered consent format. Our tiers are a little bit different than what CTTI came up with, but this is what really seemed to align with what we were getting, the feedback that we were getting from everybody. Tier 1, that first page, is our key information. And like John said, one of the things that you need to decide is how long is key information going to be? What types of consent forms need key information or not? We decided not to focus on length of consent forms and really take on the spirit of the new regulation and saying, hey, we're going to put the most important stuff up front and see how that goes without focusing on putting limits on or length or anything like that on consent forms. So with the first tier, we have the key information. It has to be limited to the one page, describes the purpose of the key information. So again, we're letting the investigators know what the feedback is that we've gotten. And that's all there on that first page. The second tier is all of the remaining required elements from the common rule. So the remaining required elements, and again, formatted to specifically meet those health literacy principles. Plain language, short sentences, using chunking, which is putting blocks of information together, and it can including visuals. That's something that I really appreciate what John just showed us, because that's something we're trying to encourage our investigators to add visuals and to charts and explain things in different ways instead of always using text, and then make sure that we're incorporating more white space. But an example of what we learned from our health literacy committee, our IRB used to always make these requests where, oh, there was, it says a risk of edema, and our IRB was always going, oh, pull that out, just say swelling, use plain language, just say swelling. But what we found out from the health literacy committee is that actually what they recommend is you put swelling to plain language, and then in parentheses, you do put the medical term. Because on the clinical side, they encourage providers to do that. So when the family gets home and they want to Google it, they need to have that medical term in order to Google it and find out more information. So we learned something there when we were trying to limit to the plain language only, and they were saying, no, just give both. You have to have the plain language, but get the medical term too, to assist them in their further information gathering that they're going to be doing when they get home. And the third tier is really the details that goes beyond the regulatory required information, the detailed visit schedule and description of all the procedures, not just the summaries, the detailed risks, not just the summaries of risks and things. HIPAA and the confidentiality section we currently have in that third tier. But the third tier is really built around feedback that we got from parents that, again, they rely on that conversation. They are very rarely going through an entire consent form and reading everything during that initial consent interview. But they do consider that consent form to be an incredible reference after the fact, after they've decided to join and they're participating in a trial. They really want to be able to use it to see the visitor schedules, kiddos experiencing something a little weird. Is that one of the risks of participation, and be able to get to that list? So we really want to design this where it's, yes, it's providing all that information. The information for making a participation decision is pushed towards the front, but that tier 3 is still a great reference for patients and families after they go home and as they're continuing to participate in the study. Next slide. I think it's back over to you, John.
I think you've, okay. So IU, you know, at the end of the day, we decided that we required the concise summary for all consents. We did a page number because we did not want to add, you know, take a 2-page consent and make it 2.5 to 3 pages as a result of a summary. So we basically said more or less around, you know, 4 pages marked the requirement. Occasionally we had some shorter that it would add a consent, but we really started off with a rule of thumb of if it hits the top of page 4, a summary is needed. Again, some people did it on page 3. We didn't do it on just federally funded. We did it on all research. And at the end of the day, in operation, it really turned out that most social behavioral educational research, the study information sheet or consent documents were less than 3 to 4 pages and really did not require a very, of course, high percentage of our biomedical and especially clinical trials did require it. And so what we did is we then pushed out the models, we pushed out the guidance, and we also pushed out the guidance that's really more narrative in focus, and then pushed out the visuals as a way of encouraging researchers to do that, to make greater use of visual icons rather than just letters and words in presenting the informed consent process. We did HRPP staff education. We did education to the research community, to PIs, and especially to coordinators who obviously are key in this process, as well as to IRB members, because it doesn't help us. They need to have consensus among the staff and the research community if when the IRB looks at it, they think key is something different. So we really worked very hard to be for all 3 parties, but especially the staff and the IRB to be on the same page as to what type of information and how much detailed information is necessary for the summary. We encouraged, but did not mandate the use of visuals. And we had, in fact, you know, some people did start using it more. Others were a little bit more hesitant to do it. And all of this, of course, was occurring in the context of greater greater use for e-consenting in general. And of course, the visuals are much more exciting in the context of e-consenting than they are in the context of a traditional paper consent form. And so we continue. I mean, we enjoyed the pilot exercise among our staff. To the there was a little bit of postpartum depression. I think that when the pilots were over and the staff left that exciting new activity, they and went back to their normal day-to-day tasks. They began to be saying, what else can I do? What else can I do differently? I enjoyed that creative, innovative process. We expanded and continue to expand our collaboration with everybody we worked with within the for the informed consent working group, in particular with the CTSI bioethics and subject advocacy. We've done other projects with them, with the community health partnership core of the CTSI. We've done other partnerships with them, and with the regulatory knowledge and support core of the CTSI. And at the end of the day, we developed that approach. We pushed out the guidance, we pushed out the models of visualization, and we encouraged more pilots and initiatives on our part, based on what we thought was a very successful working group around informed consent. That's pretty much our presentation. Would now like to turn to comments and questions. We have a couple came in on the chat.
John,
Ryan.
Let me break in really
Okay.
quick here for you,
Yep.
because I'm looking at, I copied over the questions so that you can all see them, but let me tell you the ones that are getting upvoted. So the question that people most want you to answer, and I think this is for both of you, is just a comment, these consents look amazing. Who creates them? Do you have folks with design, visual communication experience? Or, I'm also adding here to the question, is this just, you're asking some IRB staff to, get creative and Google?
Ryan, do you want to jump in and answer that first?
I will say for from what we've done with the visuals, we've only had a few that have looked kind of like what John had there. But one of the efforts that we had an investigator who is a former IRB member and has done a few studies looking into IRB related matters such as translations and things. And she actually did a partnership with the Kansas City Art Institute and went there and asked the kids, the students there, here's these medical procedures, create, graphic representations of these things to try to, because her goal is to kind of create a bank of images that have kind of been created and tested to confirm that they that they actually communicate what we want them to communicate. So there's been various things like that, but we've had pockets of teams that have been done really good at getting creative and doing these things. Where we're at now is trying to share those lessons learned and taking those and showing all of the other dozens and dozens of other research teams of, hey, look what this group did, because our teams are operating in silos a lot of the times, and somebody comes up with this great innovative new process or design or something like this, and it exists on their studies and nobody else. So that's what we're trying to do now, is really find ways of sharing what other successes others have had in terms of visual consents and things like that.
Yeah, and for at IU, this was developed by the staff. We did not bring in design experts or artistic oriented folks. I will say most of the staff did it themselves. Some of them relied upon other staff members who might have had more expertise around graphics and around the use, the adaptation or creation of images. But I think, though, if we want to really take this and make this a standard approach, we are going to have to be much more systematic in having expertise in the visualization field available for research teams. Now, won't necessarily come out of the HRPP, and it might just be that we will identify resources, or at least standard visualizations that they can make use of. But to take this up beyond a pilot and to really institutionalize it, you just can't rely exclusively on the existing staff and the existing staff's expertise and experience.
Thank you, John and Ryan. Those were both really great answers. And I agree, John, I think that this is going to have to be a group community effort. So the next question that the audience would like you to answer is, it's The last one that I put in the chat for you, can you speak to the IRB process, if any, for the development of these new consent templates / key information sections? That is, the observation of consent processes, focus group reviews of proposed key information sections, etc. Was IRB review required for that work, or was it considered a quality improvement project?
We considered it a quality improvement project and did not obtain IRB approval for it.
Yeah, we weren't looking to generalize outside of our four walls. It was just about our research community and how we were going to communicate and satisfy the requirement and meet the needs of our subjects. So we didn't consider it generalizable at all.
So a question that was sort of kind of in there was how do you make sure that the IRB members come along and, they could be as resistant to change as anybody else can be. And so, a fair amount of work had to be done with IRB members to get thorough buy-in and to get them very comfortable with this. And I would say that it was a combination of if you will, a carrot and a stick. On the one hand, we offered education and encouragement and shared some information that we obtained that were about the positiveness of these visual approaches. But we also made sure staff were at all of these meetings and were very overt in saying the question that you're raising is not a regulatory question. The question that you are raising is your comfort, not necessarily a question of whether or not the innovative consent meets the regulatory requirements, both either the letter and the spirit of those. And so, there's an element of change management that goes into moving in these directions.
And I'll also add, I showed you that old template. I mean, for the longest time, that template basically asked as a consent review checklist. You know what I mean? Instead of comparing what was presented to them against regulatory requirements, too often times they were going back to that template. Did they use the language from the template? And it just, so that's been the biggest challenge, is how to put together education to break people from those old habits of there's one way to do it and it's this approved language over here, to really switching over to doesn't include the regulatory requirements, doesn't meet the spirit of the regulation, these things. That has been, quite frankly, one of the biggest things is not only IRB members, but study staff. They're even hesitant to go out on the limb and present something different because they've been doing it one way for so long. But another thing that we've, again, going back to the Health Literacy Committee, one of the things we're working with now is asking our Health Literacy Committee to provide training to our staff and to our IRB members on just health literacy principles. Again, it just keeps on coming back to that they're the experts when it comes to facilitating comprehension. So we're really using it. They have a health literacy advocacy program or myself and a few people from our office have joined and become health literacy advocates to learn more and then carry that on. And we're incorporating it into our training materials for our IRB members, for our researchers. So that's kind of been our focus in terms of how to really get that transformational change to take hold, because John's exactly right. It's change management. And especially at an institution, growing institution like ours, there's lots of change going on in lots of different areas. So being able to get effective, long-lasting change with something as important as this takes time and energy.
Ryan, what's the institutional home of your health literacy group? Where do they lie within your institution?
They lie. So it's run partially through our equity and diversity office, but they have participants from all over. But it's definitely hospital based. There had been, prior to me approaching them and asking them these questions, there had never been a connection with research in the Research Institute. When I first approached them and said, "Hey, I think we have a shared mission. Can we work together?" That was the first time that aisle had really been crossed, and it was kind of a kick in the pants moment. It's like, why haven't we been working together forever? Where we clearly have the same mission, the same goals, and we can learn a lot from one another. But yeah, they're up completely, as with most of our programs, they're completely hospital based, and research is kind of trying to tap into those resources a lot of times.
And I would ask, members of the audience, please share your experiences around key information, around adopting the principles and the spirit and the letter of the new regulation in terms of the key information summary. What did you all do? Where did you land, and so forth? I mean, and
John?
touching on something you had said, Ryan, we moved away from a template in part because we couldn't figure out what that template would look like, but also because we were concerned, like you mentioned, that that template would then be automatically used rather than modified on a study by study basis. I mean, I don't know, at the end of the day, I don't know how far from a template our guidance is, but we call it something else. So it just can't be used, cut and paste it.
Yeah, we were so overly reliant on that template that we kind of did a baby step. I love the idea of just getting rid of the template altogether. It causes more harm than good as far as I'm concerned, and it creates this dynamic that we don't need to create in the review process. But it was a bit of a far jump. Again, going back to that change management, it was a big jump to go to no template. So we've gone this route, but it's definitely in the conversation for down the road. Whether or not we get past this step. Could we move to, okay, let's just, again, these are the requirements, design a process that meets these requirements, and we're not going to throw these templates out there that people get, become a crutch, honestly.
I do be full disclosure, we have a consent template, we just don't have a template for the key information.
Right.
Yeah.
So on that same vein, Ryan, we got a question during your presentation, but I think both you and John could answer this. What were your challenges when using, when using these customized templates on non-investigator initiated multi-site studies?
So we do not require that our templates get used. And that's been something that we've struggled with over the years, especially we have Children's Mercy has a lot of people that have been around this place for decades. So getting people to change behavior and adapt some of these new processes has been difficult. And in the past, it wasn't an official requirement, but it certainly was part of the practice where you would have to take that sponsored consent form and turn it into this Children's Mercy template. And but we're trying to get away from that again. And if you have a industry sponsored template or something, you use that and just make sure that these requirements are in there. But we still get a lot of pushback when it comes to plain language and working with the sponsors. So here's another thing that we learned from Health Literacy Committee, the teach back process. So one of the things that we're teaching our IRB staff and our IRB members is before you get into a tug of war over plain language or a certain phrase in a consent form that you don't think is plain enough and can be improved, so that we don't get into this tug of war between us and a sponsor. And again, focusing on that conversation and knowing that there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, that the IRB staff are trying to train them to point out, hey, this area of your consent form, we kind of feel like isn't maybe meeting the plain language that we would really like. Instead of going back and forth, can you please add to your protocol and to your consent process that you're going to use teachback and that you're going to ask the participants questions about this part of the study, because we feel like this is an area that's going to be a little bit more challenging for comprehension. So we actually have them write that into their consent process, that we understand that this part of the study is complicated. So we're going to take extra time and talking with our subjects about this and use teach-back methods and ask them questions and things like that.
And if you look at the examples that IU used to develop this exercise, none of them were industry-sponsored multi-site studies, right? Because you have limited autonomy with regards to the consent document. These were all consent documents that we had much more control over, and so they were like, they were all mostly investigator-initiated or NIH-funded studies, and not something that we were one of 33 sites across the country and had to use a predetermined informed consent, and any revisions had to go through 4 steps of company approval.
Thank you both. So the next question that we have in the queue was specified to John. Just a comment thanking you for the new creative consent forms, and then asking you how much time was spent developing each one, and giving us just a little bit about the development process and who was involved.
So you know, at a high level, we basically asked for volunteers from our full board team, and they led it, and they, you know, they were responsible to contact the investigator and things along those, like, to get the type of information that was needed. But at the end of the day, I mean, there was some talk of, you know, collective talk about what type of things we're looking for. But it was not a onerous task. I mean, I think it took days, hours and days, not weeks and months. And you know, again, you know, we cleaned some of them up to be even better. You know, some of the better ones we cleaned up even more than they were, and added a little bit more content and sophistication to them. But you know, it was a exercise that did not detract from the day-to-day operations.
Okay, thank you, John. So then the next question is going to you, Ryan. What is the age group where you work through key information summary within the kids program?
So the age group of the teen advisory board, or are we kind of asking like the age group for that we would include key information? You know, I think, you know, with the Ascent, it doesn't have the same requirements for the key information. So if we're talking about the actual Ascent form, you know, this is the spirit of what we've heard back from the kids that they want to hear, but we don't really hold it to the key information standards. And a lot of times with the teens, it's kind of a joint form. You know, they get the same information that the parents get. If the question's about kind of the makeup of the teen advisory board and the feedback that we got, they're all high school students, age probably, I think, 14 through 18. But I will say there was one group that I hadn't mentioned. You know, the Kids KC is our local chapter, the International Children's Advisory Network, ICANN. And in 2019, ICANN held their summit in Kansas City. So our local chapter was the international host for the ICANN summit. And they came, and I had just started talking with them and had just formed a relationship with the group. So they asked me if we could put together a program, because research ethics was going to be one of the major topics of this year's summit. So we actually put together mock IRB reviews. We put together 5 fake protocols and consent forms and separated all these kids from all over the world into little IRBs, and they did reviews. And so that was another time that we took the opportunity to ask them about key information and talk about it. And that group, there was kids as young as 10 years old with type 1 diabetes who had been through lots and lots of research studies and giving information. And that was a real eye opener, that whole experience on, you know, our child life experts are always telling us that kids have a much higher capacity than we give them credit for a lot of times. And that was an eye opener. I mean, granted, these are your more than average engaged kiddos, you know, participating in these types of groups, but it was definitely, you know, the age range was in that group was from 10 to like 18.
Thank you, Ryan. So we're going to get through maybe one more question, and then I may prompt you to just do one more. We'll see, just keeping in mind that we are live streaming here, so there's a bit of a delay for the audience. Has there been any issues using visuals when consenting non-English speaking participants, or when using non-English consent documents? For example, have you run into any cultural issues with the visuals?
You know, I would almost turn that question around and say that we were already in the process when it sort of hit us, and that, you know, some of this we already have been doing with transnational research. You know, been involved in research with, you know, in other countries with non-literate populations in which pictures were regularly used. And we were just slow to think about adopting them for our domestic use. I mean, I do say that you have to be culturally sensitive in the sense of making sure that the images that you use or develop are not offensive. And it might mean that there's some variation in the images used for consenting different populations within the subject pool, or different cultural groups or subcultures. But you know, that's a normal thing, right? You know, if we're doing research with people who speak different languages or even different dialects of the same language, we think about that. And so to some extent, it's the same process. So the answer is yes, we've had to think about that. To I'm fortunate to say, to my knowledge at least, we have not ever stuck our foot in the hole and did something that offended a subject population. Can't say we didn't offend individual subjects. We can't help that to some extent. But as subcultures, I'm not aware of any big mistakes that we made, but we certainly have to think about it.
Any comments, Ryan?
Yeah, no, we haven't really gotten that far, but I appreciate the question. We're working on a manuscript right now related to translation of IRB materials and consent forms, and this is something our institute has a program where we'll pay for translations and stuff, again, to try to eliminate some of these barriers and increase the diversity of our subject populations. And so it's a great question. Haven't dove into it, but I agree 100% with John. I think that the idea is that the visual images are more translatable across more cultures than what language is anyway. So I think even by implementing and using these visuals, you're already taking a step in the right direction. But you're absolutely right. There could be different cultural interpretations of different images, and it would need to be addressed. But I think overall, step in the right direction. But I agree, some of that additional work would need to be done over time to make sure that you have images that say the same thing to the same people or to different people.
Thank you both. And with that last question takes us to the end of this session. There was a couple questions that we couldn't get to. If anybody would like to, you can send a message directly to Ryan or John within Cadence, and potentially get some more information. Reminder that this presentation, once edited, will be put up onto the website. The slide deck will be available as soon as you go back to the Cadence platform outside of this symphony. Thank you all, and we'll see you in just 5 minutes.
And I would say, if we have a moment, feel free to email as well, not necessarily through Cadence.